Round 14 of the AFL 2023 season was both a round of what-ifs and some margins that I think a lot of people wouldn't have seen coming. But for myself, in many aspects, round 14 was the perfect round. Join me today as I recap the fallout of round 14 before getting my tips locked in for round 15. Sit back, relax, let's get this one underway. Before we dive into the recap, I think it is prudent to touch on news that has been released as of the point of me recording this video on Monday night, and that is that James Sicily from Hawthorn has failed to appeal his 3-match ban for a dangerous tackle against Brisbane's Hugh McCluggage and will serve that 3 weeks. I'm not going to dive into it at length because we will be here all day. This is why I'm looking forward to launching my AFL-based channel in 2024, because it gives us a platform to discuss these types of things deeper. If you want to discuss it with me, comment section is open as always. But my quick take on this is Sicily did lay a tackle that unfortunately concussed a player, but I feel he did a lot in this tackle to slow momentum down and to protect the player, including rolling McCluggage over his own body. Now, complete and utter unfortunate circumstance that McCluggage was knocked out. I think the worst thing out of all of it was Sicily pushing McCluggage into the ground to get himself up as he was knocked out. Wasn't a good look, but I feel at the very least it should have been knocked back from 3 weeks to maybe 1 week or even 2 weeks just for the action that left a player concussed. But as for 3+, when you look at some of the suspensions that we have seen this year that are around that mark, it doesn't sit right with me. Round 14 opened up on Thursday night with Port Adelaide hosting Geelong at Adelaide Oval. I am so glad Thursday night football is back, and I seriously hope moving forward we can get Thursday nights locked in permanently each and every round. Let's have football Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Give us as much football as you fucking can. I tipped Port Adelaide in this game, thinking they would go 11-0 in their recent run. Geelong had the team this week to knock Port Adelaide off. They had Mitch Duncan come back in. They had young Jack Bowes come back in. They had Patrick Dangerfield come back in. They had Jack Henry come back into the mix. They had a lot of players return that they have been missing and serve as core components to their premiership that they won last year, obviously minus Jack Bowes, who was part of a trade in the off-season, but especially Dangerfield coming back in. I thought he was the one player who could really shift the tide for Geelong in the midfield. And up until half-time, it was a arm wrestle of a game. It was a game that Geelong took a commanding lead in at quarter time, and you would have felt in many retrospects that maybe Geelong had it in the bag there and then. Port Adelaide managed to mount a bit of a charge in the second quarter, and whatever Ken Hinkley said to them at half-time really lit a fire underneath them, because they came out and Port Adelaide put on a third quarter performance that I think is one of the best third quarters of football we have seen from any team in the competition this year. They couldn't be beaten in the contest. They were just getting the ball and handballing it on and running in waves and finding ways to clunk contested marks, and they were racking up uncontested ball quite easily as well. They took Geelong's game away from them, and players like Tom Stewart struggled to get into the game. Somebody who prides themselves on intercepting was finding it very hard to get hands on the ball, because when Port Adelaide's forwards started clicking, it was very hard to stop them. And this was a night that Charlie Dixon, I don't think he even kicked a goal. He had a very poor game. But Port Adelaide's forward line cohesively was still able to be more damaging than Geelong's back half. Jeremy Cameron, incredibly quiet. Tom Hawkins, quiet by his standard. Tyson Stengel didn't really do much. Port Adelaide had a late out in Junior Rioli, and Quinton Narkle came in. I'm still disappointed Richmond passed up on Narkle not once but twice this year to bring him onto their list. He had about 16 disposals, he kicked 2 goals, and he looked very likely. He looks like he's worked on his fitness a lot, and he looks like a player that is going to slot into Port Adelaide's system quite seamlessly. And this team right now, I feel, regardless of the outcome we saw the other week with Melbourne defeating Collingwood, I feel Port Adelaide is the only team right now that can really push Collingwood to their limits for the premiership this year. On the flip side with Geelong, they just got Dangerfield back, but he was rushed to hospital after the game with some cracked ribs and a partially collapsed lung, which means he's obviously not going to play this week against Melbourne, and I don't know where that's going to leave him for the coming weeks. But that's another huge blow for them. They just got him back in. He was having influence on the game, and then he gets injured, and Geelong are now in a little bit of obscure land again. Are they going to miss the 8 completely after a dominant showing in 2022? Who knows? Brisbane hosted Sydney at the Gabba, and this was a game again of what ifs. Sydney had a lead at quarter time, and in the early game really looked like they had control on Brisbane as a whole. The big story out of Brisbane during the week was obviously Dan Rich and Jack Gunston both putting their hands up saying they are underperforming, and they stood themselves down from the team. And I think that's huge, given Jack Gunston, I feel, has had influence at Brisbane. Daniel Rich, on the other hand, they've been showing instances on Fox Footy during the week where a lot of his defensive run that he's notorious for doing has turned into just walking behind the play, and he's had a lot of injuries in recent years that I think has really hampered his career, and I wouldn't be surprised if he retired at the end of the season. He'd be coming close. But with them stepping out of the way, opportunity was handed to Kai Lohmann and the debutant Jasper Fletcher. Both showed incredible promise, including Jasper Fletcher. I reckon Jasper Fletcher would have come close to being both a debutant and NAB Rising Star nominee in the same round. Didn't fall that way, but when you see the future that Brisbane has, Kai Lohmann up forward, Will Ashcroft on ball, having Jasper Fletcher out on the wing or even running off of a halfback flank, these young kids that Brisbane have look brilliant, and I would really love to see Brisbane persist with these kids, even though they're still technically in that window for a premiership, and we know that we've had discussions about them not being able to win away from the Gabba, and can they win at the MCG when it counts. I really think Fagan has to take a leaf out of Collingwood's book, out of Richmond's book. You know, teams that, while they have been within contention, haven't shied away from giving young kids opportunity, and I think it's going to set Brisbane up really well. And in the end, Brisbane were too good to run, and ran away with the game. I think no Heaney, no Lance Franklin in the forward line for Sydney did hamper them quite a bit. Another mid-season draftee debuted this week with Jack Buller debuting for Sydney. However, subbed out of the game, didn't really have much of an input, but considering he hasn't been in the system for long and he was thrown in the deep end against Harris Andrews, who is one of the best defenders in the competition, especially as a lockdown defender, I think any debutant is going to have a hard time. I mean, let's not remember Samson Ryan's debut a couple of years ago where he had, I think, only one touch for the entire game. But Jack Buller still looks likely, and again, I would really like to see Sydney persist with him, because he could be, ideally, Lance Franklin's replacement. We saw in the VFL, he was able to kick 5 goals in his first game for the Sydney Reserves team. He's got the ability in him. He just needs opportunity at the level. GWS not only hosted Fremantle at Giant Stadium, but absolutely fucking destroyed them. It was game over at quarter time. I turned around and said to my old man at quarter time, GWS had about 4 or 5 goals on the board by that point in time, and I said if they keep going the way they're going, they're going to kick 15, 16 goals and blow this out of the water. They finished on 16 goals for the game, and Fremantle struggled to even score. 106 to 36, 70 points. This is a team that just fell short in the dying moments against Richmond, has been really digging deep looking for a win. They had Jesse Hogan, a late withdrawal from the game with a foot, I think it was a foot or a calf. They wanted to play it safe instead of risking him and damaging him for a few weeks. I thought GWS's forward line might struggle a bit without that big man down there. In his absence, again, opportunity arises, and Jake Riccardi comes out and kicks 5 goals. Toby Green kicks 4 goals. Young Brown, who has really stood up in the last couple of weeks as a likely forward, which a lot of people wouldn't have expected. I think he kicked 3 goals. You know, GWS are really starting to come together, and I knew the ins of both Josh Kelly and Sam Taylor were going to be pivotal to GWS turning their structure around. And boy, did they look good. And on the flip side of things, I think Fremantle have been exposed without Sean Darcy in the ruck. And Luke Jackson, unfortunately, as much talent as he has, he is not a solo ruckman. It's a bit of a shame to say it, but I think he is destined at this point in time, until he builds his skill set, to be second in command, just like he was at Melbourne behind Max Gawn. Sean Darcy has a real commanding presence in the ruck. He's a real big body, and while Luke Jackson is more athletic, I feel, around the ground, Sean Darcy can almost guarantee first use to the Fremantle midfielders. And when you've got players like Brayshaw, Sarong, you know, coming through that midfield, you want to get first use to them. And I feel Luke Jackson has struggled a little bit to feed them the ball as seamlessly as Darcy has. As soon as they get Darcy back, I think their fortunes will turn. Until then, where to for Fremantle? Their season is starting to look really rocky. Richmond hosted St Kilda at the MCG, Trent Cotchin's 300th game. Pissing down fucking rain. It was an absolute torrential downpour, similar to the torrential downpour of St Kilda goals that they put on at the start of the game. They kicked the first 4, and I started having Vietnam flashbacks, because there have been numerous seasons where we have seen St Kilda get a hold of Richmond and absolutely choke the life out of them. And I thought to myself, here we go again. We have defeated GWS at Giant Stadium. We have defeated Fremantle at Optus Stadium. We come home at the MCG for Trent Cotchin's 300th game in front of the Tiger faithful, over 62,000 people in attendance. And I thought we were going to cough it up. And then we turned it around. And after the first 4 were coughed up, we kicked the next 7 or 8 goals of the game. And from being 4 goals down early, we took a 10-point lead into the quarter-time break. And St Kilda just couldn't get a hold of a lead for the rest of the game. Richmond were just able to hold on. I still stand by the fact that I feel when it comes to wet weather football, Richmond are one of the best, if not the best, in the competition for those particular weather conditions, because of the manic football that they play. That just move the ball forward at any cost, bring it to ground, chaos handballs and everything else. It just really suits Richmond's style. And a lot of players turned back the clock. We had Trent Cotchin had 19 disposals, or 20 odd disposals and 2 goals at half time. The last time he did that in a game, Richmond hadn't won a premiership for 36 years. This predates the premiership run that Richmond have had. That's how big of a wind back, you know. He jumped in a DeLorean and went way fucking back. Dustin Martin, 35 disposals. He was back to his best again. Tim Taranto had almost 40 touches and kicked a goal that ended up being the sealer of the game late. And I really feel, deep down in my soul, Tim Taranto right now is sitting within the top 5 players Brownlow-wise this year. And I honestly feel he should be in the All-Australian team, and I think he is shaping up to be a top 10 midfielder for this season. Let me know how you feel about him, because I feel I'm being a little bit biased with my insight, but I feel, as a player who has come into this club and has been unjustly crucified by the likes of Kane Corns, people saying that we sold the farm to get him in, he is really showing what he can bring to this club. And I said in my predictions video at the start of the year, Tim Taranto will win a Brownlow medal as a Richmond player. I came out and said that with confidence. And this season, I know there's a couple of other players that probably had a jump start and is going to be too hard to chase down, the likes of Marcus Bontempelli and Zach Butters, even Christian Petrarca. But I think if Tim Taranto can finish in the top 5 of the Brownlow this year, he might earmark himself as the best recruit of 2023. I said it. And I know there's a couple of players in the mix, because you could argue, Tom Mitchell going from Hawthorn to Collingwood has been the best move. Brodie Grundy going from Collingwood to Melbourne has been the best move. But I really think what Tim Taranto has brought to Richmond is huge. Unfortunately for St Kilda, they had opportunities late in the game to get the game back on their terms, and they missed. And there were some contentious calls. 12 to 25 free kicks. There were a lot of Richmond fans in the crowd that were very unhappy with, again, another game where Richmond was soundly beaten by the umpires. I'm trying to get away from blaming umpiring decisions and that for losses and wins, but there is a disparity this year with both the level of consistency of umpiring, which is incredibly poor, and the disparity between teams and free kicks. Games don't have to be balanced with free kicks, but when one team outweighs the other one by more than double in a game, you start to ask questions. St Kilda, I still feel have it in them to play finals this year, but there were just some decisions that Ross Lyon made in this game that killed them. Nick Vlauston played one of the best quarters of football I have seen an individual play all year, and in that third quarter, he had something like, I think, 9 intercepts within that quarter alone. He ended up going down the field, smothered a ball inside 50, collected it again and kicked a goal. He hasn't kicked a goal in 3 years. I feel he has flown under the radar this year as a defender, and I feel also might very well get a nomination for the All-Australian team come the end of the season. He might not make the final squad, but I think he definitely gets a nomination. I don't think St Kilda's done. St Kilda have much more to give. Richmond, on the other hand, given the draw we had to Carlton at the start of the year, we are only 2 points out of the top 8. And our next 3 games fall against Brisbane. I think we play West Coast again in that mix as well. And I think we play... Do we play Hawthorn? We might play Hawthorn. I know that within the next few games, we have some very winnable games coming our way. And there is a lot of 2017 Richmond going about how we've gone about this year. So, I don't know. Dare to dream, Tiger fans. Dare to fucking dream. Carlton hosted Gold Coast at the MCG, and Carlton were due for a big win given the disparity and despair they have been dishing up to their fans, especially after last week when footage went viral of Carlton supporters absolutely ripping shreds off of the Carlton team as they were going down the race back into the rooms. That is not a good look for football, regardless of how your team is performing. And I think it's very hypocritical when there were Carlton supporters during the week that were calling radio stations up and they were giving passionate speeches about, listen to the outside noise, because Carlton have said they're not trying to listen to outside noise, listen to what the supporters, are trying to say, listen to the outside noise, play for play for yourselves, play for the supporters, play for your families, find somebody to play for. But then on the flip side, you've got a group of derelicts in the crowd that are absolutely ripping shreds off of these blokes. And at the end of the day, as passionate of a AFL supporter I am, I'm as one-eyed a Richmond supporter as you might ever find, ever. There has been some times where I've been upset with an outcome, but I have never sat there at a game tearing shreds off of my team. And I've unfortunately lived through an era where Richmond players did endure that from our spectators, which was disgusting. We've seen Essendon in recent years go through that. Now Carlton's going through that. And I thought that might have had a little bit of psychological bearing on the players, but it must have lit a fire underneath them, because to come out and win by 59 points against a team that has been on the up, and even when Gold Coast have lost, they've still found a way to stay in the game for most parts. This was a game that was game over really quickly, because opposed to the 6 goals the Gold Coast was able to kick between the second quarter and the last quarter, Carlton piled on 17 goals 10 for the rest of the game. And had Gold Coast been a little bit more accurate in the first quarter, they would have taken in a more sizable lead that maybe could have set them up with more momentum to run the game out. But Carlton in the end were far too superior. Harry Mackay actually managed to kick straight this week. No blemishes on on his goal kicking. Patrick Cripps snags a few goals of his own. it was just good to see some cohesiveness happening within the Carlton unit. But the question now is, can that be sustainable, or is it just a once-off blip on the radar? And I think the question on the minds and tongues of a lot of Carlton supporters is this team good enough to continue on? Because if they want to play finals this year, they're going to have to dish up performances like this continuously, otherwise they're going to find themselves on the out. Gold Coast, on the other hand, as I said, even when they've been losing, they've been finding ways to stay in the game, and there's a lot of players in this team that have really taken their game to a whole new level. Could you imagine how well Gold Coast would have tracked this year if Isaac Rankin had decided to stay at the Gold Coast? I hazard to guess, because he's been an absolute gun for Adelaide this year, and I think he would have given something to the Gold Coast this year that they're lacking just a little bit. But again, players like Bailey Humphrey coming through and, you know, really showing that they've found a genuine star in this kid. Other players really taking their games to the next level, like Noah Anderson, Matt Rowell. I feel Matty Rowell has had a very underrated season this year and hasn't been really getting the attention that he deserves, apart from eating grass, but we won't even touch on that. And they're doing well without Touk Miller, and a lot of people seem to forget that Touk Miller, you know, he finished in the top 3 for the Brownlow last year. This is a player that is capable and has the talent to be recognised as one of the best players in the competition, and he's sitting on the sidelines watching this go down. Again, a what-if scenario. Where would the Gold Coast currently be sitting if Touk Miller didn't injure himself? All these close games that they have just fallen short, would he have been enough to be a critical component to get them over the line? Stuart Dew on AFL 360 this week has said that they don't want to be a team that makes finals, you know, that just makes the 8. They want to be a team that pushes for top 4, that can win a premiership. While some people might find that laughable, I think setting goals like that long term is healthy, but you've got to recognise that for the short term, you might need to suffer a little bit to get to where you need to be, just like some of the bigger clubs have undergone. Richmond, again, perfect example. We went from obscurity to being a premiership winning team, and then over the next couple of years developed into one of the powerhouses of the competition. It is very possible for Gold Coast, if they build they place the right components in and they build a cohesive machine, they can get it done. I don't think this year is going to be the year though, but maybe I'm just being a little bit apprehensive. And the round rounded out with North Melbourne taking on Bulldogs, and talk about an arm wrestle, because even late into the last quarter, North Melbourne were able to bring it back to only 3 goals the difference, and I really thought they were going to give the Bulldogs a red hot shake. And then the Bulldogs just put the foot down and found a way to get another sizable and much needed win. If they had dropped this game, they would have been at risk of dropping out of the top 8, and they found a way to get it done. And it was with Cody Waitman playing his 50th game, kicks 6 goals. Bontempelli kicks 2 or 3 goals of his own at very critical moments and has a shitload of disposals, like we've come to, you know, acknowledge Marcus Bontempelli to have. And their midfield just got to work. And this was a game that North Melbourne really had opportunity to capture, because Liam Jones went down for the Bulldogs early, then Tim O'Brien was subbed out. So, you know, both of those players defensively are core components for the Bulldogs. Take them out, and the forward line for North Melbourne should have really gotten off the chain a little bit, especially given the interceptability that Liam Jones has brought to that defensive structure this year. And Nick Larkey should have kicked more, should have been able to drag certain players out to give more space for Callum Coleman-Jones or, you know, Cam Zirra. But again, North Melbourne and their youth just finding ways, like Will Powell kicks 2 goals within a minute to bring them back into contention for the game. Eddie Ford and Wardlaw might have had, you know, down games compared to what we have seen in recent weeks, but Sheasel comes out and has an absolute blinder. North Melbourne have really set themselves up to, you know, build this team and, you know, move forward and have all these kids grow up together, very similar to what Hawthorn have done. And once they hit their straps, they're going to be a very impressive side. And North Melbourne over the last couple of weeks have locked up a lot of those components with contract extensions. Nick Larkey probably one of the biggest ones, because I think on the market he would have had a fair bit of value as a young key forward. But he's shown faith in the club, and this is a club where historically in recent years a lot of people have wanted to jump ship from, or if they have gone to target a big fish, that big fish isn't interested in coming to that club because of the reputation the club has built, for not winning games. But to be locking up all these young kids, especially on the back of Jason Horne-Francis walking out of the club, huge, very huge for them. And I think as North Melbourne fans, you can't be disappointed with the efforts that they're putting in, even if you are losing. Can I get a kanga? Roo? So there was only 6 games that went down last week, and I fucking tipped 6 out of 6. Yes, and I thought, am I the only one? Am I a standout? There was 3 other people in our competition this week that managed the 6 out of 6. So as well as myself, congratulations to Matt Lamb 24, Macca0303, and Oiri 891. We did it. Perfect round. Congratulations to each and every one of you. That has shaken up the leaderboard overall, and I am very excited because I've been shooting for top 10 and almost had given up on being able to win. I have moved into 9th place overall, ladies and gentlemen. I am tied for 6th place. I am only 4 tips behind the lead, and we have a 2-way tie. Rockstar Pool 69 and Saintly 12 leading on 82 tips overall, with Eagles Macon and Benny Craig on 81, Macca0303 on 80, and then Freo 90, Maj Tigers and Team Wiggles on 79, with myself, Iden Cash, Matt Lamb, Vincey Boy, and my dad, the motherfuckers, on 78 to effectively round out what is the top 10 because there's so many ties. It is heating up. It is heating up in the fucking kitchen, ladies and gentlemen. I've managed to get into the top 10. Let's try to push for a top 3 finish now. I can fucking feel it. Round 15 is the last round of the buys, so after this week we get back to seeing every single team play. Thank God for that. But we kick off round 15 at GMHBA Stadium with Geelong taking on Melbourne. Now, Melbourne apparently have been changing the dimensions of Casey Fields ground to suit GMHBA and are even going down early to Geelong to have a training session on that ground. Clayton Oliver is still questionable to be in the mix for this game. Patrick Dangerfield surely going to miss with that injury. I am going to tip Melbourne, and I think it's going to be a close game. I'm going to go 16 points. I think that's fair. I think Melbourne's defensive line is going to be too hard to allow Cameron and Rowan and Hawkins to break through, especially given that Melbourne pride themselves on intercept ball, and, Geelong have been looking to get the ball in high and pluck those big marks, and I feel if they keep doing that, they're setting themselves up to fail against Melbourne. But anything can happen here. I feel it's a coin flip. Geelong don't often lose on their home deck all that much, but I feel Melbourne have it in them to cause an upset this week. Could very well change this tip, but right now we're going with Melbourne. Friday night, Marvel Stadium, St Kilda, Brisbane. I should learn from my past tips, and Brisbane have struggled to win away from the Gabba, but I feel they're a better team than St Kilda here. St Kilda's run and carry is going to be hard to stop, especially with a roof over their heads and they can get back to playing clean football. But Brisbane, on the other hand, I feel they have the answers. I feel their midfield is going to be too hard to topple. I'm going to lock in Brisbane right now. Again, another tip that I might change, but I feel that going with tips like this, even though there's only 34% going St Kilda, I don't know. Very iffy week this week, but I think Brisbane have it in them. This is clear-cut as clear-cut can be. SCG, Sydney West Coast, Sydney in Sydney, especially with how West Coast is playing. I don't see West Coast winning a game for the rest of the year. As upsetting as that might be for West Coast fans, I'm sorry. I don't know where your next win's coming from. I don't know when it's going to come either, but it's definitely not this week. Optus Stadium, Fremantle, Essendon. Now, I mentioned Sean Darcy needing to come back in, and apparently Sean Darcy might be good for this game, and there is rumours that Will Brodie and some other players who have been missing, James Aish coming back from concussion. If they bring all these players back in, I'm going to lock them in for the win. So I'm going with Fremantle now. Depending on the teams that are announced come, team reveals later in the week, it might shift. But I'm confident with Fremantle losing the last two. They lost at home to Richmond. Then they got belted on the road by GWS. I don't think they return home and cop another loss. And this is a game for Essendon that they have to win to keep their finals chances alive, especially now with teams like Richmond and GWS, in the hunt again. Geelong still very much in the mix as well. Quietly, I'm praying for Fremantle to win, so it kind of gives Richmond a chance to pop up. But I'll monitor the teams for this game very closely. Collingwood Adelaide at MCG. I'm going to go Collingwood, but I feel if there is an upset looming this week, the upset is Adelaide defeating Collingwood at the MCG. I think Adelaide have it in them to do it. They've definitely shown that they have the ability to take it to the top teams, but I think Collingwood's too good here. And the rounds out on Sunday at Heritage Bank Stadium with the Gold Coast taking on Hawthorn. This is a tough one for me. James Sicily not playing. I think if Sicily was playing, I probably would have locked in Hawthorn with confidence. I feel Hawthorn can still cause an upset here. I'm going to go Gold Coast for the time being. I might change, because Hawthorn have taken some pretty big scalps this year. Brisbane mainly, and if they play against the Gold Coast like they did against Brisbane, they'll knock Gold Coast off. But for the time being, I'm happily locking in Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Fremantle, Collingwood, and the Gold Coast. Thank you for joining me for another recap and tipping video. If you did enjoy, please do myself a favour and hit that like button down below. Be sure to subscribe if you are new, and make sure you hit that notification bell to get notified whenever I drop a brand new video. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here. Good luck to your teams this weekend, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.